In this project for Adobe Flash, we're going to create a small picture gallery or a slideshow that will play, and it has some animated effect. The effect is actually taken from a slideshow that I have on my PlayStation 3, and this is sort of a simplified version of that. Let me just play this, the finished product, so you can see what I'm talking about here. It takes a moment to load, and there's a music background, so hopefully this will not interfere with my voice. So we have the sound starts, the title of our slideshow is sliding into place, and then individual images start falling onto a virtual sort of desktop. The animation may look a little choppy when I'm recording this and playing back at the same time, but the images fade in. They go from translucent to fully visible or fully opaque. They rotate slightly and they change in size. So we are animating three properties as we are building this slideshow, and older images that are at the bottom, they fade away after a certain time, so that we only have like 2 or 3 images visible at any given time. So it's sort of a virtual stack of photos that pile on top of each other, and to give sort of a nice presentation for these images. At the very end, the music fades out, the image fades out, and the text slides down, and then the slideshow in this case will automatically start playing again. So I'm going to stop this here. So this is the preview of what we are going to create here. The project itself looks like this here. I have a couple layers, a background layer, one layer that contains the music soundtrack, one layer that contains just the title, in this case La Isla Mujeres, and then I have a folder that contains all of the pictures. I'm using 7 pictures for this slideshow. For yours, somewhere between 7 and 10 pictures will probably be suitable. We're aiming to have this slideshow run for exactly 1 minute and then repeat. So that's the plan. And in order to get started, I'm going to create a brand new Flash project by going to File, New, and I'm going to select an ActionScript 3 project, even though we're not doing anything in ActionScript here in this project at all. Actually, it's all using the built-in motion editor and animation features. So here's my blank project, and my stage is just the default stage size. Let me resize this so you can see it a little better here. And so the stage size is just the default 550 by 400, and I'm going to start creating this project by my mouse is not cooperating here, just a moment, by creating the background layer. So the default layer that is here, I'm going to rename it to call it background, and the background that I want to create is actually just a gradient, a nice gradient with some pleasing colors. There's different ways to go about it. I'm going to use a rectangle, the rectangle tool, to just draw a rectangle. I'm not trying to make it match the background directly, because I can make that happen using the Flash tools under the Align tab. If you don't have this visible, it is accessible under Window. There's an Align tab. So here I can match the size of my rectangle, the element that is selected. Both height and width of my rectangle will match the stage, and then I can center it both vertically and also horizontally, and with those steps you can perfectly match this rectangle to your stage size and also perfectly align it with the stage. So I want it to be a gradient, so I'm switching to my swatches panel here, and I select a gradient. and I want to pick a different gradient color though. I want to have sort of shades of red, from a medium red to a dark red. I'm going to copy just the hex value, pressing Command C, switching over to the left end of the gradient, pressing Command V or Control V on the PC to have the same starting point, and then just kind of giving a subtle adjustment on the slider here to allow me to get a very subtle gradient from a darker red on the left to a lighter red on the right. And actually I want this to be vertical, so I'm going to select my rectangle by clicking on it with the black arrow tool, switching to my transform tool. I'm going to just rotate it, hold down my shift key to make it perfectly snap into a vertical position, and then I just go back to my align piece one more time, match the size, distribute, and align, and now I have a nice vertical gradient. And this is my background. Since I don't want to accidentally select it, I'm going to lock it by pressing in the space where the lock appears. Now our project itself runs currently at the default frame rate of 24. I'm going to change this to 20 just to make it a little bit easier to calculate how long our slideshow will run. I want it to run for a minute, so at 20 frames per second we are looking at 1,200 frames actually. So in order to have this be visible, I need to actually insert a frame. Let me just do one here, insert a frame. And once I do that, I can scroll further to the right. I need one more here, just inserting a frame into the timeline, and then at the 1200 mark, this is where I want to really insert my frame that signifies the end of my entire timeline. So now I have frames defined for my background for 1200 frames, and if I run this at 20 frames per second, this movie will play exactly 1 minute and then start repeating. So you see this frame here. This frame section of the timeline extends exactly to frame 1200. Alright, so next up is I want to create a little title that moves into place. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call it title. Here on frame 1, I select frame 1. I'm going to use my text tool to drag out just a rectangle below. It doesn't really matter. Your title will be different. In my case, it is the name of the island that the images were taken. With this frame selected, I can also make it match the width of the stage to make it perfectly as wide as the stage itself. And then I also want to have on the tools, I should be able to pull up the paragraph panel. Just a second. I'm going to pause for a moment here. With the text tool selected, in the properties panel you can scroll down and choose various settings. For example, whether you want the text centered or left aligned. I want mine to be centered. You can choose a color by clicking on this icon here and pick a color. I'm just going to pick this orange, light orange, and I'm going to add a little bit of a drop shadow later on to make it nice and readable. You can pick a font and a size. Oops, now I turned it off accidentally. Command Z undoes whatever you didn't mean to do. But you can change the font size and the font face and things like that to your liking. I'm creating this at the bottom of my screen. I'm actually going to move it up just a little bit. But I want to center it. It should align nicely. Because I want to slide it into place from below our screen, it will slide vertically upwards into place when I play my movie. So this text only exists currently in frame 1. I have to actually, in order to animate it, I have to create frames all the way out to 1200 and also then create the animation itself. By right-clicking on the layer in the timeline, you can pull up the pop-up menu and select Create Motion Tween. This will give us a blue background for this timeline, and it will automatically extend the timeline out to match the existing one. It will automatically go out to 1200. So the first frame contains a keyframe automatically because this is where we entered content. I want to make this text move into place vertically, and I'm going to take a certain number of frames. So I want my movement, my vertical movement, take up about, or I want it to finish or arrive at its final destination at the top in about 130 frames. And this just happens to be the number of frames that match roughly the music that I'm going to select later on. I just checked in my old project. You can fine-tune this to your own liking. I'm going to insert a keyframe here. Of course, the pop-up menu is windows outside the recording window, so I'm going to go up here under Insert, Timeline. You can insert a keyframe here. Inserts a keyframe on frame 130, and I can define a new position for my text element, which is selected for frame 130. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and click and drag up my, of course I need to, that is not what I meant to do. Command Z to undo. I need to see where I'm going. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit to show all. And now I'm holding down my Shift key, clicking and dragging up, and let go of my mouse so that I have a perfectly vertical movement. So by holding down the Shift key, you can force the movement to be perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal, for example. So as if I'm moving my playhead over the timeline now, you can see that it moves. Starting from frame 1, it will start moving up, and it will arrive at its destination at the top of the screen at frame 130. Now I want it to stay there for the entire duration until almost to the very end, and at the very end I want to start moving it down again about 100 frames before my movie ends. So we're ending at 1200. At 1100 I'm going to insert a frame. I select the frame at position 1100, insert timeline keyframe to again fix the current position in place, and then I can insert another keyframe on the last frame like so, and then I can move with this last keyframe selected. I select my text again and I move it below the text again. So as I'm dragging my playhead over here, you can see that it moves, but it stays in place for the entire duration of my slideshow. And I'm defining this entire movement for the entire slideshow with 4 keyframes, and that's what you should aim for, to only have exactly 4 keyframes. We want to avoid having things move when they're not supposed to move. So this takes care of my text moving into place. Let's save this before we get any further here. I should have done this earlier here, so I'm going to save my file. File save, and this will be my slideshow. And this is just the demo version that I'm recording here. And I want to have this saved in my folder where I'm collecting everything. Alright, so now we have the sliding in place. Let's just see whether this plays. I'm just going to play the first few moments of this here. Press Command Return to see whether this initial movement actually works properly. And it seems to be moving nicely. It should come to a stop at the top and then just stay there. So not much excitement yet, but this is the first step in getting the slideshow going. After that, I want to add the music. Let's just add the music next. So in order to get music in here, I have created a folder with assets actually that I plan to use. And so I have a couple of images in a folder that I've created just for collecting a couple of images. And here there's also an MP3 file of the music that I plan to use, just a piece of classical music. And it needs to be an MP3 file to work well within Flash. So this is the file that I'm going to use. I'm going to switch back to Flash. And I'm going to import this music file to my stage, or to my library, I should say. So import file, import library, and it should come up with a file browser, and depending on what your settings are, it may open up in a different folder, but you just need to navigate to the folder where your MP3 file is located at, like so, and then open this file, and it will add it to your library automatically. So if I switch to my library tab, now I have a library item for my music that exists here. So in order to add this music to my slideshow, I'm going to create a new layer by clicking on the sticky pad node, double-clicking to rename it to music. And it doesn't matter exactly where it exists, but I'm going to put it drag it just above the background here. So here on the first frame, again, I'm inserting a keyframe, and because it automatically created one here, all I should have to do is drag this music file from my library onto the stage, and it should automatically add it to this layer. And the music is actually longer than our video will play, but it inserts frame until frame 1200. So now when I play this back, it should actually already play the music. So let me just play the first few seconds of this here. I'm going to press Command Save first so I don't lose my work in case something goes wrong. Command Return to play this back, and hopefully you will be able to hear the music now when I play this. And here we go. And this is the music that we're going to be using, and I'm hoping that this is recording because I can't actually hear it in my headset when I'm recording this demo, but hopefully this will show up in the final recording so that you can hear what I'm intending to do here. Alright, I'm stopping this playback, and I am done with this part too. So I'm locking my music file. There's one piece that I need to do actually, because music tends to want to play on even after the movie is done playing, and in order to avoid having weird sound artifacts happening with music doubling up and playing on top of itself again, I'm going to edit the music file a little bit, and I'm going to do that in the music editor part here. Not in this video, not in this panel actually, but here on this panel, if you double click on it, you can see how long it would play, or you can't. Tells you how big the file is. What I need to look for is the sound file. In order to edit the sound file itself, I have to select the layer. I'm going to click on the frame that contains on the layer and the first frame that contains my music. Then I can see in the properties panel that I have some sound effect pieces here. And what I want to do, I'm going to edit the sound envelope actually, and what I'm plan to do here is make the music stop after 60 seconds. So this is the timeline showing my music in seconds. So at 60 seconds, or I could also use 1200 frames. If you switch over to frames, it will show you exactly the frames that go with it. So at 1200 frames, I want this to be 0. If you click up here, it enters this keyframe, and you can drag down. This basically adjusts the volume of your music here. I'm dragging both channels down to make sure that it is at 0 when I hit 1200 frames, so that the music is off at that point. And 100 frames earlier, I want it to remain at full volume pretty much. So I'm just going to drag these guys roughly here. So at the end, I will ramp down the volume and it will stop playing when I hit my 1200 frames. So this will take care of the volume and to avoid repeating the music when the movie also repeats. So after 60 seconds, the volume will go down to 0, and then it should not repeat after this. So, all right, so let's add some pictures to this slideshow. In order to add my images to this slideshow, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to rename it to Pick 1 for Picture 1. And I'm actually going to create a folder that will contain all of my pictures as well. So I'm creating a folder by clicking on the folder icon at the bottom, double-clicking on the name to rename it, and then you can click this one picture and drag it on top of the pictures folder so that I can just kind of keep things nice and organized. Now, in order to make my image appear at a certain point in the timeline, and I really want it to appear further to the right, so my text is moving into place, it comes to its resting point at frame 130, and just based on the music that I'm using, I want my pictures to start at frame 200 actually. So at frame 200, the first picture should come into view and fall into place. So I select frame 200 on the layer that will contain my picture, and with this frame selected, I am inserting a keyframe. Insert timeline keyframe. Now I need to have a picture to add to my stage at this point so that I can manipulate it and animate it. I'm going to insert or import to let me import it to the stage directly and see if this works here. So here is my first image that I want to use, or you just select whichever image you want to start with, and I'm going to pick this one here as my first image. Open, and it should add the image to my stage here. However, it is just a bitmap image, and in order for us to be able to animate it, we have to modify this. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see how big the image is. It's slightly larger than our stage, which is okay. It is, however, still a bitmap. I need to turn it into a symbol so that I can manipulate it and make it do the animation. So with the image selected, I click on modify and I convert to symbol. This will give this pop-up menu, I'm going to give it the same name as the layer. It doesn't matter. You want to make sure it's a movie clip. That's important, so that what we're going to do next actually works. There is another selection for graphic. That's not what you want for this particular project. So we want it to be a movie clip, even though it's an image. With this selected, we now have it added this pick one symbol to our library, which should be identical to our bitmap image, except the symbol itself has capabilities that a plain bitmap does not have. And one of the capabilities it has is we can manipulate it using the motion editor. So I'm going to go to show all. And what we actually want to do is we want it to start out slightly rotated. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit more. I'm selecting this with my black arrow tool, switch to my frame tool. I'm going to rotate it just a little bit. You can actually see the stage behind the scenes. So I want to start out slightly large. I'm going to zoom it down a little bit. Shift, click a corner, and make it the size that you want it to be. Make sure you hold down the Shift key so you don't distort it. So this is where I want to start, and I want it to take roughly 50 frames to fall into place. So at frame 50, I'm starting at frame 200. At frame 250, I'm going to select this frame here at 250, and I'm going to insert another keyframe here. Whenever you insert a keyframe, that means that is a place where you can define new properties, whether that is position, rotation, transparency. And what we actually want to do is we want to manipulate all three properties: position, size, rotation, and transparency. That was probably 4, yeah. So in order to manipulate our starting point, I'm going to switch to Motion Editor here, the Motion Editor tab. And oh, I'm missing a step. Before I can actually do this animation business, ooh, I should have actually waited until I inserted this keyframe here. I'm going to take a step back, remove this. What I need to do first is I have to turn this sequence of frames into a motion tween. I right click inside the time frame here and I create a motion tween, just like above what we did with the title. So that needs to be in place, and it should automatically make it exactly as long as our timeline is. So now I can go to frame 250 and insert a new keyframe here by going to Insert Timeline Keyframe. Alright, so now we are ready to manipulate the starting position. I'm switching to my motion editor. I have to click the actual motion tween. It goes dark blue when I select it, and now I can go reselect my keyframe and go to the motion editor. It's one of those weird things. Sorry about that, but that's just how Flash operates here. What I want to do here is I don't want to change anything except make it perfectly transparent. And you make it transparent by going to Color, adding a color effect, basically. And the color effect I want to add is an alpha channel to set its transparency. And by default, it may pick a different number, but if you click and drag using the scrubbing thing, you can see how I can change the transparency or opacity. So I want to dial back the alpha amount to 0 to make my image perfectly invisible to begin with. The position is all fine. Now I'm selecting my next keyframe, and here I want it to be perfectly visible. So I go back to my motion editor and I'm changing my color effect, and I change the alpha to be perfectly visible here. And then I can just manipulate the position and the size. I want it to rotate slightly as it falls down. I want it to grow smaller to make it look like it really is falling away from us, and I want to change the position slightly. So you can, with these steps, that allows you to dial in this movement. So at the beginning it is perfectly invisible. As I drag my playhead over the timeline forward, it becomes more opaque, it rotates, it becomes smaller, looking like it's falling away from us on top of the desk and into the right position, and then it stays there until we make some other change to it. I want it to stay in this position for roughly 200 frames. So I'm at 250 now. I'm going to go to 450, frame 450, add a keyframe at this position to mainly to lock it in place, to make sure nothing changes between frame 250 and frame 450, because now I want to actually make it disappear again. So from starting with frame 450 and ending in frame 500, I'm going to add a keyframe here, and here again on frame 500 I'm going to dial back my alpha back to 0. And this essentially makes the picture fade away in place, and then it starts fading away. So this is where I get the effect that as I'm stacking them on top of each other, that the ones at the bottom will eventually fade away. So let's see if this works so far. I'm going to save, and I'm going to play back this part here before I add additional pictures here. So this takes a moment to load, and it should start playing the music, which I can't hear, and hopefully you can. It moves into place, and after a few moments, hopefully somewhat synchronized with the music, the first image will start appearing and falling into place and staying there for about 10 seconds or so, and then it should fade away. There we go. So now it's fading away. That's the effect that I'm after here. So the rest is really just adding more images on top of this here, and I'm going to show you one more to go through that sequence of steps one more time. And the offset that I'm using, so the image comes into place at frame 200, it is fully visible at frame 250, and at frame 300 I want the next image to start appearing. So in order to facilitate that, I'm going to create a new layer, call it Pick 2, and it is above. This layer is created above the layer that has the first picture, so that I get the proper stacking order going. So here I'm going to select frame 300, and I insert a keyframe. I'll do it up here so you can see what I'm doing. Keyframe. I import my file, import to the library this time. It doesn't really matter, you have to convert the image to a symbol either way. So I'm picking my second image that I want to use. It appears here, and why can I not see it? Just a second here. I should be able to preview this here. Yeah, if you double click on it you can see it, what it will look like. I can click here, and actually I need to drag it onto the stage at this point. On frame 300 with my layer selected, I drag it onto the stage. I'm going to rotate it slightly differently. So this is my starting point for my second image as it will come into view. Next step is I right click and create my motion tween. Oh, I have to convert it to symbol first. Alright, so let's do that. With the image selected, modify, convert to symbol. Pick 2, picture 2. Now it is a symbol, and now it automatically actually did convert this timeline on this layer to a motion tween, and it should automatically extend it all the way to the end of our timeline here for at the end of our minute. So here's my starting point, frame 300. At frame 350 I want it to be in place. So again I go to frame 350 here and insert a keyframe, and then with that in place I can change the properties. So I go back to frame 300, make sure my motion tween itself is selected. It should be dark blue. Selects. Why can I not select the frame? Just make sure it stays dark blue so that the motion tween itself is also selected. Then you can go to the motion editor and add a color effect, alpha, and dial it back to 0. And actually one thing I forgot on the earlier picture, I want these guys to have a nice drop shadow effect. So I'm going to add a filter by clicking on this plus sign here, and I'm adding a drop shadow. You can just accept the defaults. It probably is a reasonable, nice drop shadow to begin with. We can't see it yet because we have to make it visible. So this is our starting point. 50 frames later I want it to be visible, so I'm going back to my motion editor, changing my color effect. I drill down here, making it visible, and now I can just visually manipulate it, rotating it a little bit, holding down my shift key and dragging a corner to size it, and also moving it into position. It doesn't take a great deal of rotation here. I just want it to look like it's floating out of the air and lands on the desk, like so. But you can see if I'm zooming in a little bit here at 100% that this image now has a nice drop shadow, and that's what I should be doing to the other one as well, but one step at a time. So it is in place. If I play this back, you can see, or just move my playhead, it comes into place and it falls at a slightly different angle on top of the previous picture. It's in place at frame 350, so 200 frames it stays into play. It stays visible until 550. So I'm inserting a keyframe here to lock it in place basically between those two keyframes. And then 50 frames later at frame 600, one more keyframe here, and this is where I want to change the opacity back to 0 again so that it disappears. Starting at frame 550 it will fade away and it will be gone at frame 600, and it has a nice drop shadow effect. So let me add this to the other image as well so that all of my paper or my photos as they come down have a nice drop shadow. So I'm going back to my picture one, have the frame selected, the entire thing is dark blue so that I'm working with the motion tween. I can add a filter, clicking on the plus sign, drop shadow will give my first image also a drop shadow that will become visible as I'm moving my playhead over the timeline. You can see now it has a drop shadow at the bottom edge. So I'm going to save it again and play it back one more time so that you can see the first two images, because the rest of the slideshow is just more of the same. You just create new layers, you offset the starting point for each picture by roughly the same amount, and then you just kind of follow the same steps to have sort of this appearing period, 50 frames or so. And each picture should really only have exactly 4 keyframes that define its movement. The starting point, the point where it's laying on the desktop and it stays in place, it does not move for about 200 frames, which is locked into place by another keyframe, and then it disappears, and the end point is defined by this 4th keyframe. There should be no changes and no keyframes after that, and the timeline will just extend out to the edge here. Alright, so I saved it. Let's play this back to make sure we get the right stacking effect for our slideshow. And here we go, and the music should start playing. The text or the title moves into place. Our first image should appear, fall down, stay in place and visible, and then a few seconds later the second image starts appearing and falls into place. This hopefully will look smoother when you see it in real life on your computer. I'm having a feeling that the recording, it may look a little bit choppy, but you can see the first image faded away and now the second image fades away. And if you stack more images on top of each other using the same steps to create new layers, importing the image, converting it to a symbol, and then inserting those keyframes in the right frames and manipulating the motion editor properties for position, size, rotation, and transparency. Those are the four things I want you to manipulate to get this effect to work properly. And that pretty much wraps it up for this project here to create this slideshow. And you can obviously pick your own pictures. They should be either your own photos that you created or that you took, or you can pick images from Getty Images to use for this project here. So that's all. Good luck with that, and I'll see you in class.